Hello, love. I hope this letter finds you well. Today, I'm writing to you to tell you a story. This is the fourth Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. This one is entitled Little Ida's Flowers. What a pity all my flowers are dead, said little Ida. Last night they were so beautiful, and now all their leaves have withered. Why does that happen? She asked the student who had come visiting. The young man was sitting on the sofa. Ida was very fond of him because he knew the most marvelous stories, and with a pair of scissors could cut out of paper the most wonderful pictures, flowers, hearts, little dancing ladies, and castles with doors that could open. He was a happy young man and fond of children. Why do my flowers look so sad today? She asked again, and showed the student her bouquet of dying flowers. He looked at them a moment before he said, I know what is wrong with them. They have been dancing all night, and that is why they look so tired and hang their heads. But flowers can't dance, said little Ida. Sure they can, replied the student. When darkness comes and we go to bed and sleep, then the flowers jump about gaily enough. Nearly every night they hold a grand ball. Are children allowed to come to the ball too? Asked little Ida, who was eager to know how flowers brought up their children. Oh yes, both the little daisies and the lilies of the valley are allowed to come, smiled the student. Where do the most beautiful of the flowers dance? You have been in the park near the king's summer castle, the one that has the splendid garden. You've been there to feed the swans. Remember how they swim towards you when you throw breadcrumbs? That's where the grand ball is held, and very grand it is. I was there yesterday with my mother, little Ida said, and looked pensive. But there wasn't a leaf on any of the trees, and not a flower anywhere. There were a lot this summer. Where are they now? As soon as the king and all his courtiers move into town, then the flowers move up to the castle. There they live a merry life. I wish you could see it. The two most beautiful roses sit on the throne. They are the king and queen. The big red tiger lilies are the lords in waiting. They stand behind the throne and bow. Then in come all the most beautiful flowers, and the grand ball begins. The blue violets are midshipmen. They dance with the hyacinths and the crocuses, and call them miss. The tulips and the big yellow lilies are the old ladies. They see to it that everyone behaves and dances in time to the music. But, interrupted little Ida, are the flowers allowed to dance in the king's castle? No one knows they are there, continued the student. Sometimes the old night watchman, who is supposed to take care of the castle when the king is away, does walk through it. He carries a great bunch of keys, one for every door in the castle, and as soon as the flowers hear the rattle of the keys, they hide. The old night watchman can smell them, but he has never seen them. Oh, how wonderful! Little Ida clapped her hands. Wouldn't I see the flowers either if I were there? I think you could, said the student. Next time You are in the park. Look in through the windows of the castle, and you will probably see them. I was out there today. I saw a long yellow daffodil. She was lying stretched out on a sofa. She was a lady in waiting. What about the flowers in the botanical garden? Are they allowed to attend the ball too? How do they get out there? It is a very long way from where they live to the castle. Oh, sure they can come, exclaimed the student. When the flowers want to, they can fly. You have seen butterflies. Don't they look like yellow, red, and white flowers? That is exactly what they were once. They are flowers who have jumped off their stems and have learned to fly with their petals. And when they first get a taste for it, they never return to their stems, and their little petals become real wings. There's no way of knowing whether the flowers from the botanical garden know about what goes on in the castle. The next time you are there, you can whisper to one of the flowers that there will be a grand ball that night in the castle and see what happens. Flowers can't keep a secret, so that flower will tell it to the others, and when night comes, they will all fly to the castle. That will certainly surprise the professor, who is in charge of the garden. The next day, when he takes his morning walk, there won't be a single flower left in the whole botanical garden, and I'm sure he will write a paper about it. But how will the flower I tell it to talk to the others? I am sure that I have never seen a flower speak, said little Ida. They mime. It's a regular pantomime. You have seen how, when the wind blows, all the flowers shake their heads and rustle their leaves. What they are saying to each other is just as plain as what we say with our tongues is to us. Does the professor understand what they're saying? Asked little Ida. Sure he does. One morning, when he came into the garden, he saw a large nettle rustle its leaves at a carnation. It was saying, "You are so beautiful that I love you." But that kind of talk the professor doesn't like, so he hid the nettle across the fingers, that is, its leaves. But the nettle burned him, and since then the professor has never dared touch a nettle. That is very funny, little Ida laughed. I don't think that's the least bit funny, said the old chancellor, who had just come into the room and had overheard the last part of the conversation, but he never found anything funny. Such fantastic ideas are nonsense. They are harmful to a child and boring for grown-ups. The old chancellor did not like the student, especially when he found him cutting pictures out of paper with a pair of scissors. The student had just finished cutting a hanged man holding a heart. He'd been condemned for stealing hearts. Now the young man had started on another. It was the picture of a witch who was riding on a broom and was carrying her husband on the end of her nose. Little Ida thought that everything the student did was amusing, and she thought a great deal about what he had said about her flowers. My flowers are tired from dancing, she thought, and carried her bouquet over to the little table on which her playthings were. She had a whole drawer full of toys, too, and even a doll that lay in its own bed. The doll's name was Sophie. Little Ida picked her up and explained, "Please be a good doll and sleep in the drawer tonight. The flowers are sick and have to sleep in your bed so they can get well." The doll didn't answer. She was angry because someone else was to sleep in her bed. Little Ida put the flowers in the bed and pulled the covers up around them. She promised them that if they would be good and lie still, she would make them a cup of tea. "You will be well enough to be up and around tomorrow morning," she added. Then she drew the curtains around the bed so the sun wouldn't shine in their eyes. All that evening she could not think about anything but what the student had told her. When her bedtime came, she ran over to the window and pulled aside the drapes. to look at her mother's plants, which were sitting in flower pots on the window-sill. She whispered to both the tulips and the hyacinths, "I know where you are going tonight." The flower acted as though they hadn't heard her. They moved neither a petal nor a leaf, but little Ida believed what she had been told. When she got into bed, little Ida lay awake, thinking about how beautiful it must have been when all of the flowers danced in the royal castle. "I wonder if my flowers have really been there," she muttered, and then she fell asleep. Late at night she woke. She had dreamed about the flowers and the student who the chancellor had said was filling her head with nonsense. It was very quiet in the bedroom. On the table beside her parents' bed, the nightlight burned. "I wonder if my flowers are still lying in Sophie's bed," she whispered. "Oh, God, how I would love to know." She sat up in bed and looked toward the door. It was ajar. In the next room were her flowers and all her playthings. She listened. Someone was playing the piano softly and more beautifully than she had ever heard it played before. "Now all the flowers are dancing. Oh, God, how I would love to see it," she whispered. But she didn't dare get up, for she was afraid she would wake her father and mother. If only the flowers would come in here, she thought. But the flowers didn't come, and the music kept on playing. Finally, she climbed out of bed, tiptoed over to the door, and looked into the living room. There was no night light burning in there, but she could see anyway, for the moon shone in through the windows onto the floor. It was so bright that it was almost as light as day. All the tulips and the hyacinths stood in 2 long rows on the floor. On the windowsill stood only their empty flower pots. The flowers danced so gracefully, holding on to each other's leaves. They formed chains and swung each other around, just as children do when they dance. A big yellow lily sat at the piano and played. Little Ida remembered that she had seen it in the garden that summer. The student had said, "Why, it looks like Miss Line." Everybody had laughed at him then, but now little Ida thought that the slender yellow flower really did look like Miss Line, and behaved just as she did when she played. There the flower was, turning its yellow face from side to side and nodding in time to the music. None of the flowers noticed little Ida. Suddenly, a big blue crocus jumped up on the table where her playthings were, went right over to the doll's bed, and drew the curtains. There lay the sick flowers, but they didn't seem sick anymore. They leaped out of bed. They wanted to dance too. The little porcelain man, whose chin was chipped, bowed to the flowers. They jumped down onto the floor, and what a good time they had. Now in Denmark, at Shrovetide, little children are given a bunch of birch and beech branches tied together with ribbons, and fastened to their twigs are paper flowers, little toys, and candies. It is an old custom for the children to whip their parents out of bed with these switches on Shrove Monday. The switches are pretty, and most of the children keep them. Little Ida's had been lying on the table among her other toys. Bump! Down they jumped, with their ribbons flying. They thought they were flowers. A handsome little wax doll, with a broad-brimmed hat, just like the one the chancellor wore, was tied to the top of the longest branch. The switches danced the mazurka, for they were stronger than the flowers and could stamp their feet. All at once, the wax doll began to grow. It became taller and bigger and started screaming at the paper flowers, What a lot of nonsense to tell a child! What a lot of nonsense!" Now the wax doll looked exactly like the Chancellor, for he, too, wore a broad-brimmed hat, and had a yellow complexion and a sour expression. The ribbons started to hit the wax doll across the legs, and he had to pull himself together till he was only a little wax doll again. It was all so funny that little Ida could not help laughing. The switches kept on dancing, and the Chancellor had to dance too, when he was as big and tall as a man, and when he was only a little wax doll. He was given no rest, until the flowers begged the switches to stop. The flowers, who had lain in the doll's bed, felt especially sorry for the little wax doll. As soon as the switches stopped dancing, there came a knocking from the drawer where the doll Sophie lay. The little porcelain man went carefully to the edge of the table, leaned over the side of it, and pulled the drawer open as much as he could, which wasn't very much. Sophie stuck out her head. "I see there is a ball. Why hasn't anyone told me about it?" "Would you like to dance with me?" asked the porcelain man. "Pooh, you are chipped," said Sophie, and sat down on the edge of the drawer with her back to the poor little porcelain man. She thought that one of the flowers would come and ask her to dance, but none of them did. The porcelain man danced by himself, and he didn't dance badly at all. Since none of the flowers seemed to notice her, Sophie jumped down upon the floor. She landed with a crash, and all the flowers came running over to ask her whether she had hurt herself. The flowers who had lain in her bed were especially considerate, but Sophie hadn't hurt herself. Little Ida's flowers thanked her for having been allowed to sleep in her bed, and they told her that they loved her. Then they took her out to the middle of the floor, where there was a great splash of moonlight, and danced with her. All of the flowers made a circle around them, and Sophie was so happy that she told the flowers they could keep her bed, even though she didn't like sleeping in the drawer. "Thank you," the flowers replied. "It is most kind of you, but our life is short. Tomorrow we shall be dead. Tell little Ida to bury us out in the garden, where the canary is buried. The next year we shall come to life again and be even more beautiful than we are now." "You mustn't die," cried the doll, and kissed the flowers. At that moment, the door of the dining room opened, and the most beautiful flowers came dancing in. Little Ida could not imagine where they had come from, unless they were the flowers from the park near the king's castle. First entered 2 roses who wore gold crowns. They were the king and the queen. Behind them came the carnations and the lilies, bowing and waving to the other flowers. There was music. Big poppies and peonies blew on the pods of sweet peas with such vigor that their faces were red. The bluebells tingled. It was a funny orchestra, both to watch and to listen to. At last came all the other flowers dancing. Violets, daisies, and lilies of the valley. As they finished their dance, they kissed each other. It was lovely to see. The flowers said good night to each other, and little Ida climbed back into her little bed and dreamed about everything she had seen. The next morning, when she woke, she ran right over to the doll's bed to see if the flowers were still there. They were there, but now they were all shriveled and dead. Her doll Sophie was in the drawer. She looked awfully sleepy. "Can you remember what you are supposed to tell me?" little Ida asked. Sophie didn't say a word. "You are not a good doll," scolded little Ida. "Remember how all the flowers danced with you." Then she took a paper box that had a lovely picture of a bird on its lid and laid the flowers in it. "That will be your honorable coffin," she said. "And when my cousins come from Norway, then we'll have a funeral and bury you, so you can come again next summer and be more beautiful than you are now." The cousins from Norway were two strong boys. Their names were Jonas and Adolf. Their father had given them each a bow and some arrows, and these they had brought along to show little Ida. She told them about the poor flowers that had died and allowed them to attend the funeral. It was almost a procession. First came the boys with their bows slung over their shoulders, then little Ida carrying the pretty little paper box. In the corner of the garden they dug a little grave. Ida kissed the flowers before she buried them. Jonas and Adolf shot an arrow above the grave, for they did not have a gun or a cannon. The end. I enjoyed that one very much. Thought it was very sweet. Until I write again, anytime you rest, rest well. Love, Lori Jo.